Hi there. I am a little under the weather today, but I'm going to try to bring it for this conversation about what you're looking for in the lease. This is my lease breakdown number 2. So we are going to look at a Zillow rental lease, a lease that is populated out of Zillow Rental Manager, and go through the tenant obligations and then also the security deposit. And then next we'll talk about landlord obligations. So this is the second video in a 3-part series. I will link to the first video. It will be the pinned comment in the comments for this video here. I did this whole video yesterday and I had the energy level of Eeyore, which is not how you want to approach a boring topic like leases. So I'm going to try and bring it for you guys. As a note, before we get started, I pulled this lease, so it's a free lease out of Zillow. It might cost you money to get the watermark out of it. I don't know, because it's not the lease that I use with my tenants. If you want the lease that I use with my tenants, just email me and I'm happy to send it to you and you can compare the two. I recommend everybody pulls a lease from Zillow, Avail, or KeyCheck and Furnish Finder. And the reason for that is because those companies have paid lawyers to do all the groundwork for you and to make sure that the lease is up to speed for your year in your state and in your city. So this is a dummy lease for Colorado Springs, but I noticed that it did have really recent changes that had come through the legislature on it. So I think you are definitely best protected if you pull a lease from one of these big companies. At the very least, it will be educational. It was for me. And one other thing, I am not a lawyer. I am not a CPA. I am not a real estate agent in any state other than Colorado. And it's important that you know that before we proceed. This is my guidance, but it may not be relevant in your state, which is again, another great reason to pull the lease for your state. So I'm gonna do my best to give a condensed overview of each section that we go through, and we'll start with the property condition. But I think the problem with leases in general is that they're boring, they're written really dry, and if you've never done it before, it was hard, at least for me, I should only speak for myself, but it was hard for me to go through a lease paragraph by paragraph and kind of pay attention to what it's talking about, because it's just so boring. I'm gonna try and give you the super exciting version of a lease from Colorado on a snowy day with maybe a mild case of bronchitis. And yes, that is self-pity you hear in my voice, and I would like it to go away. Okay, so let's start with property condition. So this just states that the tenant will receive the property as advertised or in better condition. Issue comes up when you are using old photos. So sometimes you'll see people and they will rip photos off of a staged property or a property that's been up in the MLS. So they purchased the property and they're using the old photos. People do this sometimes, and then just make a note that the property will have different furniture. It's okay to do this. You just need to be crystal clear with the tenants that the furniture they're seeing in the photos is not the furniture that will be in the place. I think that this could create a degree of suspicion, so I recommend just full transparency on this and saying those are the photos from the MLS when I bought it, but I will have different furniture in there. Are you okay with that? And just getting them to say in writing that they are. I don't think that this is a non-issue. I'll tell you, this summer when we had a place get messed up by tenants a little bit, or new tenants came in after that, and I thought, hey, I've cleaned everything, it looks nicer, it looks way better in here, it's been freshly painted, blah, blah, blah. And they said the place was really cute, but they made a note later to say it's not what it looked like in the photos. So this does come up sometimes, and it's not something that you really want to come up. So just, again, make sure that you're over communicating on this. Time to watch all the videos and you just want to ask someone specific questions and or have someone take out the headache of setting up the listing for you, reach out. I have consulting in 1 hour, 2 hour packages, and then a mentor package. And typically people book for 2 hours and we talk first, then they implement the changes, and then we talk when they get a new tenant. So that's usually how the 2 hour package works. And then alternately, people that just want me to set up their listing, pick a platform, I do it. And then I tell them everything, why I did what I did, and I help them vet and source the first tenant. So my email is on the screen. Reach out if you're interested. Okay, the possession paragraph, kind of 2 things that you care about. One is an instance when the property is unavailable to the tenant and it's not the host landlord's fault. The second is when the property is unavailable to the tenant and it is the host landlord's fault. So in Colorado, the implications of the first scenario, when it's not the landlord's fault, is that the lease stays in place, but that the tenant doesn't have to pay. So the lease remains as is, their rights to that place remain as is, but they don't have to pay the landlord anything. In the second scenario, they again don't have to pay the landlord anything, but they can break the lease. This rent paragraph is just saying that the tenant is paying for the month ahead of them, not behind them. So whatever day is designated in the lease for the tenant to pay, it's covering the future, not the past. And that's what this paragraph is discussing. Now, the next paragraph is not very much fun. It's about late payments. And Colorado specifically has a new law that takes into account a 5% max payment versus $50. And I'm about to get into this, but again, it's specific to Colorado, so you may want to check out your state and your laws on this point or other points. So if a tenant is late on their rent, you can charge them a fee, and the fee can be equal to whatever is more of these two items. So either $50 or 5% of whatever has elapsed and has gone unpaid. Doesn't mean that the tenant doesn't have to pay you in the future, but you also can't charge them like $50 per day. It's a one-time fee for the amount that is elapsed. And I don't know how you handle that. Like, do you charge them at the 15th mark and then you charge them again at the 30-day mark and they haven't paid, what that looks like? And the lease isn't super clear on it, but Zillow definitely populated this paragraph and talked about it. So let's talk about the math of this. So if you had a rental that was $2,000 per month and you divide it to about 66 per day. If you had missed 8 days of payment, you would do 8 times 66 and you would get 528. So that's how much money the landlord has not been paid by the tenant yet. When you pull 5% of 528, it's $26. So you can charge $26 or $50, whichever is more. So as the landlord, you would charge $50. If you feel like this video has taught you something, please like it. If you want more content like this, please subscribe. How I believe this works, I've never had to test it. It is a new thing, but how it's written, that is my interpretation. Section, last month's rent. So I don't know why I added this, and I would strip it out. I made this lease like 2 or 3 months ago. Who knows what I was thinking back then, but I would never charge someone for last month's rent, only because I like to charge a full month's rent in the deposit. So my security deposit, I feel like this is such a crazy thing in the midterm space. Some people are saying, charge a really low deposit, and that's nuts to me because a standard long-term deposit is usually equal to 1 month's rent, and that doesn't include the protection of your furniture. So if anything, there's an argument for a higher deposit for the midterm space or any kind of furnished space, but I think tenants won't accept that. So when I rent out to someone, before I ever hand over the keys, I require 1 month's rent, so the month they're about to rent, and then the security deposit, which is equal to 1 month's rent. Now, if I was also asking for last month's rent, that is 3 months worth of rent. So in this scenario, they would have to give me $6,000 before I ever hand over the keys. I think that is going to have a lot of people heading toward the door and not interested in your property. So I don't do that. I just do first month's rent and a deposit equal to the rent before I hand them anything. All right, and then final piece of this video, the security deposit. So in the state of Colorado, these are the items that you can use for the deposit. Past rent. So if someone walks away and doesn't pay you, you can take it out of the security deposit. Damages. So if someone damages the property, you can take it out of the security deposit to make yourself whole. Cleaning costs. If somebody leaves it very dirty and you don't have a cleaning fee on them, the cleaning costs can come out of there. And or if the cleaning fee doesn't cover the full cleaning cost, you can pull the rest of it out of the security deposit. And finally, it says if you were looking for books on the midterm rental space, I have 3 out there. This one is good if you're looking for different types of people to rent to besides nurses, so different demographics than just nurses. It talks about nurses, but it also talks about other people that might need your midterm rental and how to source them. This book is just an all this is how you do midterm rentals. That's why it's called Erin's Guide to Midterm Rentals, but it's got checklists. This one has interviews with other landlords and stuff and tenants, which I think people like. This one is called My First Rental Property Workbook, and it's probably the most applicable to what we're doing today. It walks you through vetting, setting up your lease, things like that. It's really just meant to be like a checklist of everything to kind of cover yourself as you prepare yourself to have tenants and as you have tenants. And all of these are available on Amazon and Audible, except for this one, because this one you fill out, so it wouldn't make sense to have it in audio format. The security deposit will not relieve tenant of any obligation to pay the rent due under the lease. They still owe you that money even though you have the security deposit. Now, you can't double charge them. It's not like if you have a rogue tenant and they've left and you have a month left on their lease and you take the security deposit that you can also charge them. It's not like that. It's not supposed to make you money. It's just supposed to help you out if something goes wrong. Cover the timeline for returning the security deposit. I also just want to mention pet deposits. I think that they are misleading. The reason why I think a pet deposit is misleading is because if there's damage to your property, whether it's the walls or the couch, you don't care if it was the tenant that did it, the tenant's guest that did it, the dog that did it. It doesn't matter. You just want it to be corrected. You want the property to look the way it did when you handed it over. So to have a specific dog deposit, I don't think makes sense. The assumption is whatever damage happens to the property, we're going to correct it with that deposit, and we don't care if it's a dog deposit or something else. I think it's a better idea to do a one-time fee against the dog and or to build rent in against the dog, so like $20 a month for the dog or dogs, and not a deposit, because that doesn't, again, make a lot of sense to me. As an aside, if an ESA or a service animal comes in and destroys any of the furniture, I know that there's a lot of rules around ESAs and service animals, but you can charge against the deposit in that situation. You don't sacrifice all your rights just because it's an emotional support animal or a service animal. You can still make yourself right out of that deposit. And again, it doesn't have to be a pet deposit, it can be the security deposit. And then final section, the returning of the security deposit. So in this case, the default is 30 days. So the landlord, if you don't put anything into the lease, then you have to return the deposit within 30 days. If you put in a shorter time frame into the lease, so if you say you'll have the deposit back within 10 days of your exit, then you have to have the deposit back within 10 days. But in Colorado, you can go as long as 60 days, but again, it has to be written into the lease. If you don't write anything into the lease, then the default is 30 days. If you do want to write it into the lease, it can be 60 days, but then you have to return the money. In this case, they're indicating that they want you to write a single check to a person to make them right, but I use electronic products like Venmo or Zelle, and so it wouldn't be a check, it would just be an issuing of their money back through Venmo or Zelle. And also it gets into the fact that the tenant should give you a forwarding address. But again, for deposits, it doesn't really matter anymore because you're probably going to do it through your phone or some kind of electronic transfer, so you don't necessarily need their forwarding address. That said, the lease here is saying that you can't get mad at your landlord if they don't send a check if you haven't provided an address for that check to go to. And then finally, if you take money out of the deposit, you just have to provide an itemized list to the tenant about what you've taken out and why. All right, thank you for coming this far with me. I hope that it was nothing but fireworks and excitement all about the lease. I will have part 3 of this out soon. Who knows when, but soon. Thanks again. Happy rentals.